Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 1st of September of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the South Donetsk direction, where according to information we have, the Russians began full-scale offensive operations towards the stronghold of Vuhledar. I'll remind you that the 72nd Mechanized Brigade is the main forces, the base, the core of defense of this direction, and if you remember, during the previous few days we've been talking a lot that the Ukrainian military authorities decided to redeploy this brigade to the Kursk direction or to the Pokrovsk direction with the purpose to stabilize the situation. We don't know for sure whether the Ukrainian authorities, military authorities, redeployed the force of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade or not. The only thing we have is their official Telegram post in their official Telegram channel, where they're saying that thanks to you superheroes for believing in the Black Zaporozhian. So it's like their nickname of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade. So some sources are saying that Ukrainian authorities, military authorities, decided not to redeploy the force of 72nd Brigade in the last moment, and they decided to keep them here in the Vuhledar direction, and the Russians launched their offensive. First we got reports from pro-Ukrainian sources. We got this report somewhere at 11 p.m. of this 31st of August of 2024 that the Russians began full-scale offensive operation and that the Russians are storming the city, this stronghold in front. Later we got the same reports that were reported, confirmed by pro-Russian sources. Active assault actions by the Russian armed forces led to a partial collapse of the Ukrainian armed forces defense in some areas of the city. The Ukrainian armed forces are leaving their positions. So the post was talking, the author of this post was talking about the city of Vuhledar, yet we haven't received even a single geolocation that can confirm the Russian attacks or the Russian presence on the territory of the city. The only thing we have is the video that was published by the Ukrainians, and in this video we can see very heavy explosions, lots of attacks, multiple launch rocket strikes on the Ukrainian positions inside of the city. So maybe this is already an episode of heavy clashes inside of the city. Maybe it's just an artillery preparation. We don't know for sure, but we know one thing for sure, that the clashes are taking place. And now the most important part of the South Donetsk operation begins. Either the Russians are able to take under control Vuhledar very fast or not. If the Russians are able to take under control Vuhledar, of course this is going to be complete disaster for the Ukrainians. The Russians will be able to move further deep inside of the territory of Ukraine, and I'll remind you that according to information we have, during the previous 48-72 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the vicinity of Vadiana as well. So now we see the Russians are attacking the Ukrainian positions in Vuhledar, and the Russians are attacking the Ukrainian positions in Vadiana itself, trying to take the Ukrainian positions inside of the coal mine South Donbass in pincers, and to encircle these positions and to force the Ukrainians to fall back. Also, during the previous 24 hours, we got additional video of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the main defense belts and the main strongholds of the armed forces of Ukraine in this direction. So let's wait. This is very important battle, a very important battle. If the Russians are able to win this battle, then we might see another breakthrough of the armed force of Russian Federation, and it is also unknown where exactly the Ukrainians are able to slow down the Russians in the South Donetsk direction. Now let's talk about Kurakhove. The sources are saying that the Russians are bombing the city. A lot of strikes, a lot of FAB attacks during the previous 24 hours. The people are saying that one can say that the Russians haven't been bombing Kurakhove itself probably so heavily since the beginning of the special military operation. We have just one geolocation, just one video. A man who was fishing managed to make a video, managed to film the moment when the Russians attacked the area in the vicinity of Kurakhove with FAB. Now let's move further and let's talk about the cities of Kupiansk, Girnik, Selydove, where the very difficult situation for the Ukrainians. And first let's talk about the southern pincer. If you remember, just yesterday we were talking about Russian attempts to attack in the western part of Maximilianovka. In this video that was published by the 46th Air Mobile Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine, we can see very powerful Russian attack with the use of significant number of armored vehicles and tanks. And the Ukrainians, so in this video we can see how the Ukrainians were trying to repel those Russian attacks with FPV drones and with artillery. One of the episodes was geolocated, and the Ukrainians FPV drone the Russian vehicle exactly in this point. So of course this video was published by the Ukrainians, and they will not show us additional progress and so on, but obviously we understand that the Russians' main goal was to get as close as possible to the northwestern outskirts of the city. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians published the video of how they were bombing FPV droning the Russian forces in the western part of Krasnogorovka. If you remember, these farms used to be in contested area and this part of Krasnogorovka, but now we have no doubts that the Russians managed to capture the territory, because the video was confirmed, this video that was published by the Ukrainians confirmed the additional Russian progress. And if summarize Russian attack in this area, we can make a conclusion that most likely the Russians were trying to attack along the railways towards the village of Hostre, or the Russians were trying to improve their positions along the this road in direction of the northwestern part of Krasnogorovka, so the territory that still remains under complete Ukraine control. And now, if we summarize everything that we've just discussed, we can make a conclusion that the Russians are trying to improve their positions and to capture everything that located inside of this red line. So this is something like the southern pincer, the southern part of Nivoyska cauldron. I'll remind you that according to different sources, according to information we have, currently the Ukrainians still have significant number of forces. Some sources reported that up to 3 brigades are located in this area, maybe not like the full brigades, but maybe some battalions and platoons of brigades, but obviously 3 brigades, the forces of 3 brigades are located exactly in this square. And now we see the Russian attempts to create the southern pincer and to create an encirclement from the southern direction. Now let's move to the northern pincer, to the area between the cities of Karlovka, Galicinovka, Dalinovka and Ukrainsk. As you can see, we have a lot of icons, which means we have a lot of geolocations. According to different sources, the Russians managed to establish complete control over Galicinovka, but still we haven't received even a single geolocation that confirm Russian progress in the southern part of the village. So as you can see, as you know, there is a river, the river by the name of Vovcha. This is the way how the river goes, and according to information, we still haven't received any update that confirms Russian control over this part. So most of the mappers are keeping this territory either under complete Ukraine control or in the gray zone or in the contested area, but nobody shows this territory as a territory under complete Russian control. But during the previous 24 hours, we received geolocations and received the video from the village of Dalinovka. In this video, we can see the soldiers and the forces of 114th Motorized Brigade of the Armored Forces of Russian Federation. And in this video, we can see how the Russian soldiers were raising the flag above the central part of this village. Of course, this 100% sure information that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to force the Ukrainians to fall back and that the Russians captured this territory completely. Based on this video, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps, obviously in Russian favor. Now we see the additional progress. We see that the Russians are moving further, and the main target and the main objectives of the Russians is to take under control the rest of Galicinovka, Желанное Перше and Желанное Druge. Furthermore, according to information we have from pro-Russian sources, as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to enter the northeastern part of the village of Kupiansk. We have additional changes on the ground by different reliable pro-Russian mappers. So summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that currently the Russians are trying to create the northern pincer, and the northern pincer will include the parts and the cities and villages of Желанное Druge, Желанное Перше, Galicinovka, Lisivka and the northeastern part of Kupiansk. If the Russians are able to take under control this territory, then obviously the Ukrainians from this cauldron will not be able to evacuate and to escape the encirclement. The Russians obviously will leave the Ukrainians some road for evacuation. We're talking about the territory between Zaryana, Kurakhove, and these, let's say, fields. But obviously, the distance between the pincers, between the edge positions in Zhelana Druga and, let's say, in the northwestern part of Krasnogorovka is less than 5 kilometers, and obviously this territory will be under complete Russian fire control, and up to 70% of forces Ukrainians would lose if they decide to evacuate their personnel in the last moment. Some sources are saying that Ukrainians have already begun the process, but obviously we can't tell for sure whether the Ukrainians are telling the truth or they just try to reduce the pressure and media pressure on Ukrainian forces. The Russians continue controlling the main supply roads. Today we got another batch of videos of how the Russians were FPV droning the Ukrainians inside of the village by the name of Girnik. Few more armored vehicles, warehouses and ammo depots were destroyed. So the main supply road still under complete Russian control, and the Ukrainians can't do anything with this. Now let's move to Selydove, and for the first time since the beginning of the battle for this city, we start receiving first geolocations, some pictures that maybe confirm additional Russian progress. First, let's talk about this icon. In this video we can see a tank, and as I understand, it's very difficult to understand, to determine whether the tank belongs to the armed force of Ukraine or armed force of Russian Federation. The only thing we know for sure is that the tank, somewhere in the vicinity of the railways and the road, on the intersection of the railways and the regular road, was attacking someone's positions, either the Russian positions or the Ukrainian positions. So obviously this is the line of combat contact, at least by the time when the video was made or when it was published. So, and based on this video, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor, and we have added additional territory in the area of Mikhailovka and right to this village of Memrik, and further in direction of Dolinovka under complete Russian control. So significant progress according to the geolocations. Now let's move to other reports. Some very reliable Russian sources reported that the Russian armored forces have established complete control over the Pavlov Street, and if we go back to Selydove, we can find this Pavlov Street in the southern part of Selydove. So this is the Pavlov Street, and according to pro-Russian sources, this street was completely captured by the Russians. And later we got another very important update from the central hospital of Selydove, and this is the Russian sources published just one photo, and the author of this photo is saying that the Russian soldier reached this hospital and made a photo of the main sign of the hospital, and on this sign we can read that this is the central hospital of the city of Selydove. So we don't see any flags, we don't see Russian soldiers, we don't see the presence of the Russian soldiers. The only thing we have is just some photo and the report of some author that this video photo was made, let's say, today or the day before yesterday. So summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that the edge Russian forces managed to establish complete control over this part of Selydove as well during the previous 24 hours. Obviously significant progress. Anyway, summarizing everything, we still haven't received any videos or photos from the northern landfill, and we still haven't received any reports whether the Russians managed to capture the central Selydove stronghold. We are talking about the high-rise building area or not. So maybe currently this is the wall that the Ukrainians managed to use as the main factor to slow down and to stop the Russians. So anyway, the situation, despite the fact that maybe the Ukrainians managed to stabilize the situation by redeployment of some forces from the South Donetsk direction to the Pokrovsk direction, but from one side they managed to slow down the Russians a bit, but on the other hand the Russians launched full-scale offensive operation in this direction, which can also lead to complete defeat of the armed forces of Ukraine. Now let's move further. As for the northern direction, we have no changes on the ground, just some updates from different mappers, including pro-Ukrainian. They continue changing map in Russian favor. In Hrodivka, according to pro-Russian and neutral mappers, Hrodivka was already captured by the Russians, but according to Deep State, just 30% of Hrodivka is under complete Russian control, the rest is under complete Ukrainian. From this direction we got another video how the Russian FPV drone operators were attacking and destroying Ukrainian vehicles that were moving along the main supply road between the city of Pokrovsk and the village of Hrodivka. So this is the situation in this direction. Now let's move further to the Toretsk, New-York agglomeration. The Russians continue their offensive operation, but as for this direction, yes, we can confirm and we can agree that based on the geolocations, based on the numbers of geolocations we've been receiving for the previous week, we can make a conclusion that the Ukrainians managed to slow down the Russians, at least in the central part and in the eastern part of the city of Toretsk. The Russians are not moving further. Now the Russians are trying to move and to encircle the city of Toretsk from the northeast and from the east, from the northeast and from the north. We continue receiving updates from the villages of Dachne, Delivka. According to information we have, the Russians managed to to establish complete control over the village by the name of Druzhba. So everything that located below this red line was captured by the Russians according to different pro-Russian sources. If this information is correct, most likely tomorrow, the day after, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation will confirm this information. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians continue moving along the railways, and now the very heavy clashes are taking place for the village of Dachne and for the village of Delivka. If the Russians are able to take under control over this territory, then they will be able to establish fire control and maybe physical control by the sabotage and reconnaissance group over the main supply roads that goes from Konstantinovka to Toretsk itself. So if the Russians are able to cut the main supply roads, of course, then we can start counting days when the Toretsk is going to fall, when Toretsk falls. As for the Chasiv Yar direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special, just regular aviation and artillery activity. The Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions. But you know, when we don't have any updates, sometimes that means that very soon we're going to receive significant update with the Russian flag somewhere in the western outskirts of the Chasiv Yar. So currently nothing can surprise us. Now let's move to Siversk direction. We have lots of very interesting updates, and according to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, as a result of actions, as a result of successful offensive operation, the units of the southern group of forces managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Vuhledar. So this village is located along the railways, and based on this report of the Ministry of Defense, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor, and this is obviously significant progress of the Russians. Furthermore, if we take a look at map, we're going to see that currently there are no more villages or settlements between the Russian edge positions and the city of Siversk, and currently the distance between the city of Siversk and the village of Vuhledar is less than 5 kilometers, which is obviously significant progress of the armed force of Russian Federation. Most likely the Russians are going to continue their offensive further along the railways, because the Russians were very successful, are very successful in the Pokrovsk direction. They're also conducting their offensive along the railways, and now the Russians are doing the same but in the Siversk direction. So summarizing everything, most likely during the next few days, few weeks or months, the Russians will try to take under control this territory, and they will try to reach the dam in the southern part of Siversk, and from this perspective the Russians will be able to cut the territory in two, and furthermore to create additional cauldron for the Ukrainians that are currently located in the fields between Vuhledar, Veselaya, Kuzminovka and Zvanovka. Furthermore, don't forget that the Russians are storming right now the village of Hrodivka and are trying to improve their positions in the village of Perezhny. So for now we see that the pressure is increasing and increasing from the Russian side, and the battle for Siversk may start much faster than we think. Now let's move further to the northern Kupiansk direction. We have additional progress on the ground according to geolocations. The Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were FPV droning the Russians in the southwestern part of Piszczane. And based on this video, we have adjusted the map and added additional territory and turned additional territory from contested to the territory of Russian control. We're talking about these three lines. Furthermore, according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, the Russians managed to improve their positions along the main supply road between Kurakhove and Berestove. We're talking about this road. This road Ukrainians used to use for supporting their forces around Berestove. Now we see that the road was cut off physically, was cut by the Russians physically, and the Ukrainians lost their logistic. Their logistic was decreased, the level of their logistic, and obviously according to different mappers, the Russians are planning to move further in the southern direction with the purpose to create another cauldron for the Ukrainians who are currently located in the fields between the village of Piszczane, Berestove and Stelmachovka. This area is used to be under the responsibilities of the 77th Air Mobile Brigade, but a few days ago we got report that this brigade lost its combat capabilities and was redeployed from the line of combat contact, and that redeployment led to Russian significant progress. So let's wait for additional updates, but obviously this territory, this area is going to be very hot during the next few days. Now let's move to the artillery and aviation duels between the city of Belgorod and the city of Kharkiv. The Ukrainians continue bombing and attacking the Russian cities, and as we see, according to the geolocations, the Ukrainians were bombing the city of Belgorod with multiple launch rocket systems, and the Ukrainians were not targeting. They were attacking just to cover as much as possible, as many as possible square kilometers of the city. According to information we have, 7 civilians were injured, including 2 children. The Russians, as an act of revenge, were attacking and bombing the city of Kharkiv. Lots of explosions, and the most important, lots of accurate Iskander strikes. Some sources reported that as a result of another Iskander strike, the Russians managed to destroy the warehouse and the headquarters or the concentration of force of the 3rd Azov Brigade, of the 3rd Storm Assault Brigade Azov, and somewhere in the area of the Kharkiv Sport Palace, so somewhere here. We got additional, we got receive more videos. We will discuss them later during the next update when we receive additional information. Furthermore, the Russians, as a result of Iskander strike, destroyed the warehouse of Ukrainian armed forces on the territory of the power plant. In this video, we can see that as a result of attack, the roof of the building was destroyed, and then through the roof we can see the concentration and number of Ukrainian vehicles. Now let's move further. As we discussed in the previous update, the Russians, as a result of a serious Iskander strikes with different warheads, managed to destroy a huge convoy of armed forces of Ukraine. The Ukrainians were trying to redeploy forces from the Sumy area to the Pokrovsk direction. For these purposes, the Ukrainians were using trucks. These trucks were fully loaded with different equipment, Western weapon, tanks, Bradley T-72, maybe Leopards, and many other types of weapon. But the Russians discovered the concentration of these trucks, and as a result of 4 Iskander strikes, the entire convoy was destroyed. The Russians used 3 Iskanders with the cluster warhead and 1 Iskander just with a very powerful explosion. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kursk direction, where the Ukrainians continue offensive operation. During the previous 24 hours, we have very small changes on the ground. According to different mappers, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions in the vicinity of Nichaev, and according to the geolocations that were published by the Russians, the Ukrainians managed to answer the village of Pogribki. So in this video we can see a number of Russian FPV drone attacks on Ukrainian positions and on Ukrainian communication equipment, which confirms Ukrainian presence in this area. So currently I can't tell for sure, and I don't know for sure whether the Ukrainians control the entire village, and the most important, what is the status of the village of Orlovka, Novaya Sorochina, Staraya Sorochina, and Kruglenkaya. So maybe the Ukrainians have already established control over everything that located inside of this yellow line. Maybe not. Maybe the Ukrainians attacked the Russian positions from fields, trying to encircle them or something like this. So we are waiting for additional details, additional geolocations, and as soon as we got some, we will make the corrections and changes on map in someone's favor, either the Russians or the Ukrainian. And now the most important thing that I would like to discuss with you. Currently, people are saying that the main problem and the main reason why the Ukrainians failed in the Kursk direction and why the Ukrainians failed in the Pokrovsk direction, because the Ukrainians thought that if they attack in the Kursk, the Russians would be forced to redeploy their forces from the Pokrovsk direction towards the Kursk direction with the purpose to stabilize the situation. But we see that the Russians haven't done this yet, and the Russians are not going to do this. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians introduced additional forces in the Pokrovsk direction and in the South Donetsk direction with the purpose to defeat the Ukrainians completely and to capture significant territories. So you need to understand one thing, that it's not like the problem of tactics that Siversk created. So his plan was to force the Russians to fall back. No, it's not true. It's not failure of Siversk. It's not a failure of Siversk. This situation with Pokrovsk and with Kursk. This is the problem, and this is big failure of the Western intelligence. First of all, of NATO countries, of United Kingdom and the United States of America. And the main mistake and the main problem that was discovered right now, that's the sources, these parties, the Ukrainian allies have discovered during the Kursk and during the Pokrovsk offensive operation, is that at the beginning of all these operations, the Western intelligence haven't managed to calculate and to discover the real number of Russian forces. And just now they realized that the number of Russian forces that are involved in the special military operation is much higher than the number of forces they thought the Russians have. Currently, nobody knows the exact number, but obviously it may be 1.5, 1.6 more than the Western countries, NATO intelligence, United States of intelligence, supposed the Russians have. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.